I wanted to remake Elden Ring's Glintblade phalanx ability, just because I thought it looked really cool, and this tutorial is going to show you how to do just that. I use a few different Niagara effects that you can grab from the link in the description, as well as a couple animations from Mixamo. Basically, when summoning the swords, they appear overhead and align themselves into position around the character. They follow around the player, rotate in place, and float independently from the player's gate. And the swords can either be launched by input or automatically based on proximity to a target. We're going to start off by opening up our third-person character. And we're going to attach a new spring arm to our mesh. In our viewport, we want to have this spring arm set so that it is behind us. And I like to put it up just about waist high, but it doesn't really matter where we're putting it. I'll change the target arm length to 100. Underneath our spring arm, we're going to be adding 4 scene components. Our first scene is going to go directly overhead. And this is going to be our spawn point for our swords. Then for the other 3, we want to have a left sword, a right sword, and a center sword. For our left sword, I'm going to change the Z value for our location to 75. The X value to 100, and the Y value to 90. And with our right sword, basically going to be doing the same thing, except our Y value is going to be negative 90. In our center, we'll have an X value of 100, keep it at 0 for Y, and 130 for our Z. Now this is just in relative position for looking directly onto our character. If you want to have this be reversed, technically this would be the right sword, and we could just swap those. We're going to change the spawn point to be the same X and Y value as our center, but 20 units higher for the Z value. You do not want to have the spawn point and the center scene to overlap, because all of the swords, when they respond, are going to stop. But now that we have these, we can use that logic for relative locations. Next, we can move on to making our sword blueprint. So in our content drawer, right click, go to blueprint class, select actor, and we'll name this BP sword. Then we'll open up BP sword, and we're going to add a static mesh. And you can use whatever static mesh you want. I have this sword. Just kind of rotate it so that it is pointing to our right. Then we're going to add a capsule collision. And this is going to be our hitbox. And then we want to make this pretty much match the confines of our sword somewhat tightly. Then we want to add a projectile movement. For our initial and max speed, you could set this to be whatever you'd like. We're just going to set 800. The important thing is if we search for auto activate, we want to make sure that that's unchecked, because as soon as we spawn these, the projectile is going to fire, and we want these hovering behind us. So we are going to set this to be activated on a button press. Then we could search for homing. Select yes, this is a homing projectile. And the homing accelerated magnitude, we're going to say is 10,000. Compile it and save it. And go back to our third person character. And we'll go to our event graph. We're going to right click and we're going to get a keyboard event. I'm just going to keep it at 1. And we're going to get a branch and we're going to need to have 2 variables set up. Both of them are booleans. The first one we could just call summoning. And the second is going to be called swords active. We'll drag both of these in, get an OR bool, and connect it to our branch. What we're going to do when we press 1 is summon our swords, but we want to make sure that we can only do that when there are no swords currently active, and we don't want to initiate it again if we haven't launched the swords. So summoning is going to be set to true immediately after this, so make sure that we compile. Drag in summoning, connect it to false, and set it to be true. Now, it's up to you if you want to use a montage. I did grab one off of Mixamo. We'll get play montage. And I just have this raise montage here. Just a character raising up a sword. And I have 2 notifies. One that we're going to play the effects on, and the other that we're going to be summoning on. If you don't know how to make a notify in a animation montage, just right click, add notify, and then write down the montage notify name. And we want to make sure that it plays on our skeletal mesh. And then off of notify name, we are going to switch on name and reconnect this pin to on notify begin. I did not have a default pin, so I'm just going to uncheck that. And the first one I had was FX, and the other I had was summon. And make sure that if you are doing this, these notifies are case sensitive. We'll come back to the FX a little later, so I'm just going to place a reroute node there. And we are going to spawn our swords with a for each loop. We don't necessarily need to make a variable for our array, since we could just drag in our left, right, and center swords. Then off of any one of them, get make array, add 2 pins. And then off of our spawn point, we're going to spawn our swords actor. So we'll get spawn actor from class. The class is BP underscore sword. And we will split the transform. And we want to get the relative location and rotation of our spawn point, so then when it spawns, it stays attached to our mesh. Now, we do want to make use of these swords that we are summoning, so we're going to make an array. And these are going to be an array of swords. The type is going to be BP sword, object reference. And up in the details, we want to switch this from a single to an array. So off of our return value, we'll add unique and connect our swords array. we want to attach them to our component. So we will attach component to component. You can choose any one of these, just remove the target. So the target is going to be our return value. It'll automatically populate this root component because we have a root component in our sword. And the parent is going to be the array element of our for loop. So if we test this out, it spawns the 3 swords, a bit too high. And so in our viewport, we will get our spawn point. We'll change its rotation to 0. And all of them are facing backwards, so we will change that to be appropriate. So say 180. Back in our event graph, we will take our return value from our actor, and we are going to set the world location of our default scene route. And we'll get our spawn point and get world location. Okay, so that's all 3 of them stacked up on top of each other. So now we need to move them from our spawn point to our relative scenes. So after we get our completed, we will create a new timer. So set timer by event. And we'll create a custom event. And we will call this move to point. The time we'll say is 0.02 seconds, and then we'll loop it. And we want to promote this timer to a variable, and we'll name it move timer. And at this point, our summoning is done, but we're going to set summoning to be false after we fire the swords. But instead, we're going to have swords active be set to true, because they are. That way, when we have our swords already active, because we have swords active being true at this point, we won't be able to go and summon again. For our move to point, we'll get our sword array, and we will get for each loop. And we want to have an is valid check here. And it's like the one with the question mark. We're going to take our array element and get our root component. And we're going to get its relative transform. And we are going to set the relative transform. And we will connect our root component to the target. And our is valid execute pin to this. Now for as long as this is looping on this timer, basically being used in place of a timeline, we're going to t-interp 2. We want to split our structured pin, set our delta time to 0.1, and our interp speed to 0.25, and connect this to our new transform. Then after our relative transform, we want to check to see if we are at a desired location. The way we get that is if we take our relative transform and then get nearly equal to, or nearly equal transform. We want to see if our transform is close enough to where we were trying to interp to. And if it is, then we're going to clear and invalidate our timer. And for these tolerances, you can set them all to be 0.1. And when this timer stops, it's representative of our swords being inside the location of our scene components. So we will set summoning to be false, and then we are going to set a new variable called canFire. And that is going to be of type Boolean. When we test this out, we'll see this move into our location, and we may have to readjust the rotation of our scene components. And we want to make sure that canFire is a single Boolean, and set that to be true. And you'll just need to adjust your spring arm and scenes to the rotation that you like. Okay, so keeping the 90-degree rotation on the z-axis, the spawn point being 0, and then 90 for the other scenes. Or you can also take the spring arm and attach it to the capsule component instead. It is entirely up to you. So as we made those adjustments, you see the sword spawning and then going down. I want to have these a little closer to the character, and I don't want the swords to be as long. So we're going to go to the static mesh in our sword blueprint, and we're going to set the scale to 0.5. And then I'm going to lower the height of each of our scenes by 20. Okay. And so then our character's not just holding up a random two hands. I'm also going to just add our sword as a static mesh. And attach that to the right hand. Close enough. So next we're going to go to our event graph, and we're going to make a new keyboard event. This time we'll say is 2, and this is going to be us firing the swords at a target. So we set up canFire, so we check immediately after we press our action to cast. Then after our branch, we're going to set it to be false off of the true pin. And I'm going to copy the can play montage because I'm using a second animation, which is just the spellcast montage. And again, I have another notify just called fire. And so we want to activate each of our swords in turn, detach them from our actor, and send them off on their way. So we're going to get our swords away, then get a for each loop. Again, we're going to check to see if array element is valid. And we're going to check our array element and detach it from our actor. Then, off of our same sword object, we're going to get the projectile movement. And we need to set a target, and we need to activate this. I'm going to open the content drawer and go back to our third-person character, and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this BP underscore target. And either getting a lock-on system or any other way, other than doing what I'm doing, we could select a target, but for this we're going to get on begin play. We're going to get actor of class BP underscore target. We're going to promote that value to a variable, and we're going to call it target. Off of our projectile movement, we're going to set homing target component. And we'll take our target. We can connect it to our target component, but our target component needs to be a scene. So our target, we need to get the root component. And that will allow us to connect the branch. And then off of our projectile movement again, we just call activate. And in our third person map, we'll drag in our target. And if we test it out with 1, and press 2, yep, it will do that. We want to change our detach to keep to world for the location and the rotation. And in our sword blueprint, we're going to create a new event off of our hitbox. All the way on the bottom right of our details, we'll get on component begin overlap. And we'll create a custom event as well. And we'll just call this hit target. So whatever effects we want to do when this hits the target, we can assign it here, whether or not that's doing damage if you've implemented a damage system. But for now, we're just going to destroy actor. And then we're just going to print hit just for our debug. And since this is set to overlap, it could overlap when we have our swords out but not fired. So we're just going to get a branch. And we're going to check to see if our projectile movement is active. This way, if you have those swords out and you walk against a wall, it's not going to destroy the projectile. And if you walk up to an enemy, it's still not going to do any damage. You could have another check to see if this actor is of our class BP target, and then ignore this, however you'd want to set up, but we don't want to have it just overlap with everything and then end up destroying the target or destroying our actor. So if we overlap and it is active, we're going to call our hit target. Okay, and all three of those hit, and then deleted themselves. So now when we test this out, it could be that we're standing out on the side here, and we fire it, and then the swords will just go over to the side. And in fact, it overlapped with us, so then it just never reached our target, and it would have just hit us. So firstly, after our completed, we're just going to get a small delay. We can just keep it at 0.2. And then we are going to set our swords active to be false, so then we can summon our swords again after they're fired. We're going to set the velocity before we get to our activation. We want to send these swords forward, and we want to send them a little bit upwards before they start homing to the target. Off of our projectile movement, we'll set the velocity. And I'm just going to collapse this to a node to save space. And we'll rename this velocity. We're going to get our actor's forward vector and the up vector. We're going to multiply each by an integer. Well, for the integer value, we'll set this to be 12,000 for each. So now when we are facing sideways, it shoots it a bit forward and up. Next, we want to have our swords rotate after they are fired. So we can set that up with another timer after our sword's active. So we'll get set timer by event. Create a new custom event. We'll call it rotate toward target. We'll have it looping, and the duration will be 0.01 seconds. We'll take our sword away. We'll get a for loop. And these could fire off even after the swords get destroyed, so we want to check again if this is valid. But we're also going to have to check twice. So we'll get is valid function. The first time we'll check it with our branch. Does the same thing as the isValid that we were using before. If it's true, we're going to set the actor's rotation. Otherwise, we're going to get a small delay. And then we'll check again. And if this is false, we want to clear and invalidate this timer. So we'll promote this to a variable as well. And we'll call it rotate timer. So we clear and invalidate timer by handle off of false. Now, in order to set the rotation, we need to get an rInterp too. The target is going to be our array element. And since by the time this is fired, we're no longer using the relative rotation, we're using the world, we can get our world rotation of our default scene root. Which is going to be current. And our target is going to be the look at rotation. Of our actor's location. Of the array element. To our target's location. So we'll get our target. Then we'll get actor location. We could duplicate the get actor location and just connect our array element pin. And then for the delta time, we can have that be 0.1 with an interp speed of 1. Oops, actually, instead of the default scene root, we need to get the root component. So now this will work. However, you'll notice that when we fire this off, it does kind of rotate towards the target, but we're not doing it from the sword end first. Because I know everyone's going to be using a different mesh, what we need to do is drag in our sword into the level. And we could see that this is flying towards the side. So we need to take our sword, rotate it 90 degrees, such that it's facing forward. That way when it fires off, this is the direction that it's going to be going if we're facing in that direction. Now we need to recalibrate though, because now our swords are going to be 90 degrees rotated off to the side. So now we could take our right, left, and center sword and zero out the entirety of our rotation. So they spawn going forward, fire them off, and now the swords are rotating directly at our target. I figured I would reiterate at this step, just then everyone's on the same page of how to handle the rotations from its relative location to its world location. So now we're going to add a little bit of an aesthetic flourish on this, and we're going to have our sword rotate after we summon them. So in our event graph for our sword, we're going to create a new custom event. And this is just going to be called rotate swords. Or just rotate sword since this is per sword. We'll set a new timer. And a new custom event off that timer. And we'll just call it rotate. We want to take our default scene route, and then we want to set relative rotation. Split the structured pin, and then we're going to set a new float variable. And we can just call it num number rotation degrees. It doesn't really matter. All that it's going to be is whatever this variable is. Then we're going to add whatever amount we want. And then each tick of this timer, we set it to be a new value. I'm just going to set this to be 1. Then we want to set num to be our x value. Change the timer to 0.01. Set it to looping. And up on top of event begin play, we can just call it rotate sword. So now we have this little effect here. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit. 0.5. Excellent. The next adjustment we're going to make is adding a little bit of lag to our spring arm, which is the whole point of having the spring arm in the first place. That way our swords don't act like they are strictly attached to our mesh. So in the details, we can search for lag, enable camera lag, and enable rotation lag. The camera lag speed I like is 25 with rotation lag of 2. You can leave everything else the same. So after they're summoned, they do have a little bit of a sway. You don't necessarily have to follow us. Now back in the sword, I'm going to add the Niagara effect. Delete the static mesh. Open and compile. And it is still the same mesh, it's just now on a Niagara effect, and since we used the capsule component, this can be swapped in between either your own static mesh or your own Niagara effect, however you see fit. And now because I'm using a Niagara effect, it's not going to be doing that flickering with the camera, because there's no collision on this other than what's on the hitbox. And back in our FX, you can add the effect to our spawn point and spawn system attached. And this is going to be the shockwave effect at the forward vector of our spawn point. Right, and back in our sword on our projectile movement, we type in velocity. We'll set that to be 0 for X, Y, and Z, because now we're handling it in our blueprint. And in our event graph, we're going to make one more custom event that's just going to stop the rotation. So we can just call it stop rotate. And we could just clear and invalidate timer. And in our third person character, after we fire this off, we just call stop rotate. That way we don't have any relative rotation when we're trying to do world rotations. If we didn't want to manually cast and instead have these swords work off of proximity, like the original Glintblade phalanx effect, we can select everything from our keyboard, press to our switch on name, and remove it. We'll create a new custom event, and we'll call it Fire Swords. This is going to be based off of a distance to our target. So we're going to get the target and the actor location. Then we duplicate that, subtract both vectors, and then get the vector length. Then we could check to see if this is less than, we'll say 750. Then we can fire this off. But for it to continuously check, we either need to put this on tick or on another timer. So after we clear our move timer and can fire is set to true, we can remove can fire since we're not going to be using it anymore. Then we can set a new timer by event. Of the event, we'll get a create event since we already made one, and then select Fire Swords. Have that looping, have that time be at 0.01 seconds, and promote the return value, and we'll rename it Proximity Timer. Then when this is true, we're going to clear and invalidate the timer by handle. So now if we walk by, our swords launch. I want to say thank you to the pillars of the Patreon for their support: Winterberry Shark, Thatcher Moss, Francesco Pota, and K Panic, and to everyone else who has supported this channel. If you like these tutorials and want annotated project files from just about everything I've done, or you just want to help me out, you could check out the Patreon, or maybe become a member here on YouTube. Feel free to join the Discord for updates, to ask questions, or even show off your own work. Otherwise, that's all I've got for now. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you've been inspired.